For all updates on CAT Prep, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon.
Hi, welcome to Bodhi Prep. My name is Brajesh, and here we have one more beautiful reading comprehension passage for you. This passage is from the Life Sciences, and a similar passage has come before in CAT. So we will read the passage and we will try to understand every paragraph. We will summarize every paragraph, and after summarizing every paragraph, we will try to find the central idea of the passage, right? So here we have the passage, and it talks about Charles Darwin. Let's start. It says the unifying theme for much of modern biology is based on Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, the process of natural selection by which nature selects the fittest, best adapted organisms to reproduce, multiply, and survive as organisms change. And so the point is that when you read the first paragraph, you will find that it is a long sentence and not easy to understand. But the point is that the author talks about Charles Darwin and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, and this is a unifying theme. So it talks a little positive about Charles Darwin's theory of modern Charles Darwin theory of evolution and its place in modern biology. As organisms change and new variants thrive, species emerge and evolve, but over the past century, advances in genetics and molecular biology have outlined a modern neo Darwinian theory of evolution. So, until this point, the author says, yes, Darwin's theory of evolution is very important, but he says towards the end that there is something that is a neo Darwinian theory of evolution, and this has come from advances in genetics and molecular biology. DNA sequences randomly mutate in organisms with the specific sequences best adapted to the environment, multiply and prevail. But this explanation for evolution turns out to be incomplete. So, what is happening in this paragraph? Again, we have to create blocks of information. The author talks about Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. He says it is a unifying theme, but he says there is something new, and that is advances in genetics and molecular biology tells us that there is something more at work than just the theory of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. And what he says that it is random mutation and something, and it says that this explanation, so the new stuff that seems to be at work, the explanation for that turns out to be incomplete. So there is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, but there is something new as well, and this turns out to be incomplete, or it is not completely convincing, the author says. So yes, we have something which is slightly different from the theory of evolution, and it is not complete in its explanation. One problem with Darwin's theory is that while species do evolve more adaptive traits, the rate of random DNA sequence mutation turns out to be too slow to explain many of the changes. So the author in the second paragraph in the first sentence talks about the problem with Darwin's theory. He says that there is some issue with Darwin's theory, and that is concerned with with the rate of random DNA sequence mutation. So the rate at which the mutation happens is too slow to explain many of the changes. Scientists, well aware of the issue, have proposed a variety of genetic mechanisms to compensate genetic drift, in which small groups of individuals undergo dramatic genetic change, or epistasis, in which one set of genes suppress another, to name just two. So the scientists have found that Darwin's theory does not explain lots of things, particularly the rate of random mutation, which is too slow to explain many of the changes. So they have come up with new stuff, new name, and that is genetic drift and epistasis. So genetic drift and epistasis, they have something to do with mutation, but what exactly they are, let's not worry about it. If there is a question on genetic drift, or if there is a question under epistasis, we can come to the second paragraph. But the second paragraph broadly talks about one of the weaknesses of Darwin's theory. And then further it says, yet even with such mechanisms in play, genetic mutation rates for complex organisms such as humans are dramatically lower than the frequency of change for a host of traits. The rapid emergence of trait variety is difficult to explain just through classic genetics and neo-Darwinism. So through classic genetics and neo-Darwinian theory, it is difficult to explain the rapid emergence of trait variety. Part of the explanation can be found in some concepts that John Baptist Lamarck. So here we have a new individual coming in, and that is Lamarck. Lamarck proposed 50 years before Darwin published his work. So Lamarck proposed something with respect to dramatic changes in the traits, and he proposed this 50 years before Darwin. Lamarck's theory long relegated to the dustbin of science. So this shows that Lamarck's theory was not very much accepted. Long relegated to the dustbin of science, held among other things that environment can directly alter traits which are then inherited by generations to come. So this is what Lamarck has to say. This becomes a very, very important part of the paragraph. At the start, Lamarck might have been pilloried as a religious heretic, but in modern times, it is the orthodoxy of science and especially Darwin's untouchable theory of evolution that has caused his name to be treated like a joke. So, what we get to know from this paragraph is that there is someone by the name Lamarck, and his idea about how environment can directly alter the traits is very much plausible, but he was earlier not accepted, and even today he is accepted as a joke. Yet by the end of his career, Darwin himself had come around. Even without the benefit of molecular biology, he could see that random changes were not fast enough to support his theory in full. So even Darwin was doubting his theory. Not completely, but yes, to some extent, he was doubting his theory. So, what do you have now in this paragraph? This is a big paragraph, and what do we see here is that there is a gentleman by the name John Baptist Lamarck who suggested that environment can directly alter the traits, and that is the reason why sometimes you have fast changes in the genes, which natural selection or Darwin's theory does not explain. But Lamarck was not taken very seriously. Even today, he is not taken very seriously. He is treated as a joke. So, people's attitude towards Lamarck can be seen in this paragraph, and what Lamarck had to say, and at what time he came into being, and at what time he was present, also has been given in this paragraph. After this, we have the question is this: if natural selection isn't acting on genetic mutations alone, then what molecular forces create the full suite of variation in traits required for natural selection to finish the job? One clue came in 53, just as James Watson and Francis Crick were unraveling the mysteries of DNA and the double helix. In that year, the developmental biologist Conrad Waddington of the University of Edinburgh reported that fruit flies exposed to outside chemical stimulus or changes in temperature during embryonic development could be pushed to develop varying wing structures. The changes the scientists induced in that single generation would thereafter be inherited by progeny down the lineage. Waddington coined a term epigenetics to describe this phenomenon of rapid change. So rapid change was the question that was bothering Darwin and also many other scientists in the earlier paragraph. So this rapid change has been given as the name epigenetics by someone. So, in fact, the point is that if natural selection isn't acting on genetic mutations alone, that means something else is also acting on genetic mutations. And what is that something else? That is what we call as the epigenetics, or epigenetics is something in which the environment has an impact on the genes. So here we have the changes the scientists induced in that single generation would thereafter be inherited. And where did this change come from? It came from changes in the temperature during embryonic development. Although Waddington described the general role of epigenetics, he was no more aware of the molecular elements or mechanisms involved than Lamarck or Darwin. But the more molecular biology decodes the workings of life, the more Waddington's concepts and Lamarck's make sense. Indeed, although the vast majority of environmental factors cannot directly, so understand this is a very, very important statement. Vast majority of environmental factors cannot directly alter the molecular sequence of DNA. They do regulate a host of epigenetic mechanisms that regulate how DNA functions, turning the expression of genes up or down, or dictating how proteins, the products of our genes, are expressed in cells. The point is that there are two things which the passage discusses. One is natural selection. Natural selection is a term coined by Charles Darwin, and it is very much popular through his theory of evolution. So, natural selection was given by Charles Darwin to us, but natural selection was not enough to explain some of the rapid changes happening in the genes. And this rapid change happening in the genes was seen by Lamarck, but was not taken very seriously. And subsequently, in this paragraph, it says that while working at the molecular level, some scientist by the name Waddington at the University of Edinburgh, he coined the term epigenetics. And what is epigenetics basically? Epigenetics is basically the majority of environmental factors that directly alter the molecular sequence of DNA. they do regulate a host of epigenetic mechanisms. That means epigenetic mechanisms are regulated by the environmental factors. So the environmental factors might play a role in turning the expression of the genes up or down. So, apart from the natural selection, which has been proposed by Charles Darwin, there is also one more factor, and that is the environmental factor, which might bring in changes in the genes or the genetic mutation, and thereby bring in new characteristics or features in ourselves. So, if you look at this entire passage, there are certain blocks of information. So, what is the first block of information? The first block of information is Darwin and his theory of natural selection or theory of evolution. Darwin's theory of evolution has been said that it occupies a holy place in the world of biology, but it does not explain everything in full. So what do you have? You have something more, and that is Lamarck. So Lamarck was there before Darwin, and he said that yes, there is something more other than the natural selection, which results in quick changes in genes or in new features coming in the genes. That is how I can put it. So Lamarck was not taken very seriously. He was mocked by many people. He was taken as a joke. But gradually, what happened? That sometime in the 1950s at University of Edinburgh, some scientist by the name Waddington, he did some sort of experiment, and then he coined the term epigenetics. So, what theory of evolution by Darwin could not explain completely, the epigenetics idea explains that thing. That is why we have certain quick changes in the genetic structure of something, and this is known as epigenetics. And in the last paragraph, it has been explained that epigenetics is nothing but a host of environmental factors that might affect the molecular sequence of DNA. So, epigenetics is that factor which might play a role in bringing in rapid molecular changes in the sequence of the DNA. And Lamarck was very close to this. So, Lamarck, by the author, is taken very seriously. And though in his time he was not taken very seriously. So, you have Darwin, you have epigenetics by Waddington, you have Lamarck, and these are some of the three elements that have been discussed in the passage. Darwin has been treated as a holy cow. Beyond doubt, Lamarck was mocked by his contemporaries who came 50 years before Darwin. And epigenetics is the third thing, or the second thing apart from natural selection, that can have an impact on the sequence of the DNA at a molecular level. And what is epigenetics? It is the majority of environmental factors that can have an impact on the sequence of DNA. So this seems to be the overall story of the passage. Once you have understood the story, it becomes easy for you to mark questions and understand this, that many of the CAT passages in the past have come from these kind of topics in which the word epigenetics has frequently come. So if there is a prior familiarity with the terms and you have prior understanding of these things, reading the passage in the actual exam becomes quite easy. So these are the sort of passages that you must read to improve your reading skills, because these are the sort of passages that you are likely to face in the CAT exam.